Hello students, today in this module we are going to learn about interval estimation. So after studying this module, you will learn what is meant by interval estimation as compared to point estimation of a parameter. You would also learn how to use the sampling distributions of estimators to derive interval estimates. We would also try to learn about the interpretation of the confidence interval, which is based on probability theory. And finally, we would learn how reliability and precision of the estimate are related and how to obtain the desirable sample size. We have learned that the method of point estimation provides us with the tools to make a single estimate of the unknown population parameter. This is a useful method when we require a single value of the estimate. Now this creates a problem since different estimates would result from different samples selected from the same population, even if all other conditions like the method of sample selection and the sample size remain unchanged. The variation in estimated values results from the sampling fluctuations of the estimator. It is a matter of pure chance that which particular sample gets selected, as all the samples are equally likely resulting in different point estimates of the same parameter value. In many situations, you will find, however, that we may only be concerned about the approximate value of the parameter. Interval estimation, therefore, gives us a range of values within which the parameter value is likely to be within a given probability. To arrive at the confidence interval, we need to know about the sampling distribution of the estimator. So let us understand what is sampling distribution of an estimator. The estimator is a sample statistic which is a function of sample observations. Now once the sample is observed and sample value is known, then substituting the sample values in the formula for the estimator, we derive an estimate of the parameter. For different samples, the estimates differ. Total number of possible samples of size small n from a finite population of size capital N is n raised to the power n, where, let me repeat, it is capital N raised to the power small n, if sampling is with replacement. So if all possible samples from the population are examined, the resulting distribution of the values of the sample statistics can be described by a probability distribution. The probability distribution of the sample statistic is the sampling distribution of the estimator. The sampling distribution represents the probability of occurrence of each of the possible values of the estimator. Now this would give us the probability of drawing a sample resulting in a particular estimate. So let us understand in this section 3.1 what is the sampling distribution of the mean. Let us assume that all possible random samples of n observations, each to be described as capital X1, X2, so on till Xn, be drawn from a normally distributed population. The mean of the population is mu and variance is sigma square. Now consider any one of the possible samples. Each sample unit has an equal chance of being one of the population units, since each population unit has equal chance of being selected. Now each sample unit therefore has the same distribution as the population. Hence we can say that each sample unit, which is xi, where I takes the value from 1 to n, n is small. Please remember we use small n for sample size and we use capital N for population size. So we are saying that each sample unit xi is normally distributed with mean mu and variance sigma square. Now what is true for one sample is equally true for all possible samples, because each sample has the same probability of being selected. The mean of a sample is defined as x bar, which is equal to sigma xi, I takes the value from 1 to small n, divided by n. N is again small. Now calculating the means of all the possible samples, we obtain a distribution of sample means, each resulting from a different sample. So you will have x1 bar, x2 bar, x3 bar, and so on. Each x1 bar or xi bar, I may say so, is from a different sample. The probability of a particular value of the sample mean is the probability of the selection of the samples that result in that mean value. Now this is because more than one sample may have the same mean value even if the sample units differ. So if you take a sample of size 10, different samples may give you the same means. So although all samples are equally likely, all mean values are not equally likely. Thus we can assign a probability to each possible sample mean. Now since we have a probability distribution, it has a mean and a variance. Now we can use the rule of mathematical expectation and derive the mean and variance of the probability distribution of sample means, where a random sample of size n observations is selected. How do we do it? Let us see that. We can define expected value of x bar equal to expected value within bracket sigma xi, I from 1 to n, divided by n. Now this can be mathematically written to be equal to 1 upon n sigma expected value of xi, which is again equal to 1 by n sigma mu, and sigma is again from 1 to n. Now this is equal to 1 upon n into n nu and is equal to nu. Now this is based on the property that the mean of all xi's is same, nu, and since nu is constant, therefore sigma nu is equal to nu. Similarly, variance of x bar is equal to variance sigma xi, I from 1 to n by n, which is now equal to 1 upon n square into sigma variance of xi, and sigma is over I. This is again equal to 1 upon n square into sigma square, sigma or sum of sigma square, where summation is over I. This we can again write down to be equal to 1 upon n square into n sigma square. Hence this is equal to sigma square by n. So what we have shown is that expected value of x bar is nu or mu, and variance of x bar is sigma square by n. So if the population standard deviation sigma is known, then the sample means are also normally distributed with mean mu and variance sigma square by n. So sample mean is normally distributed since the mean is a linear function of normally distributed variables xi, each of which is normally distributed with mean mu and variance sigma square. So we have the result that if x is normally distributed with mean mu and standard deviation sigma or variance sigma square, then x bar is distributed normally with mean mu and variance sigma by root n is the standard deviation, and variance would be sigma square by n. Note that although the distributions of both the population and the sample means are centered at mu, the variance of the sampling distribution, which is sigma square by n, is less than the variance of the population, which is sigma square. Now this is because each sample mean averages out the variability within the respective sample. The sample means therefore are less variable than the original population values. I am sure you can understand this. Let us now talk about the central limit theorem, which extends these results to cases of non-normal distributions or for unknown distributions. According to central limit theorem, which is also denoted as CLT, if sample size is sufficiently large, then sampling distributions will be approximately normal. Greater the divergence of the population distribution from a normal distribution, greater must be the sample size for the sampling distribution to be approximately normal. Now, since the population distribution itself may be unknown, we may not know how large the sample needs to be for the central limit theorem to apply. So we apply the rule of thumb. Now, rule of thumb is to assume the sampling distribution is approximately normal if n is greater than or equal to 30 when sigma is known. So if n is greater than or equal to 30 and sigma is known, we assume that the sampling distribution is approximately normal. So if population variance is unknown, then it has to be estimated by sample variance, where a sample of n observations could be defined as sigma hat square is equal to sigma or sum xi minus x bar square, where summation is from 1 to small n whole divided by n minus 1, which can be rewritten as summation x square or xi square over I minus x bar square divided by n minus 1, which is equal to s square. So s is small s here. Now, sample variance will vary from sample to sample. The variability of the distribution of sample means increases as a result. However, by the central limit theorem, the sampling distribution of means will be approximately normal if n is greater than or equal to 40 when unknown sigma square is estimated from sample data. If the sampling distribution is normal, then we can use the standard normal distribution for making inferences about the population mean. So what we are saying is, we can, if x bar is distributed normally with mean mu and standard deviation sigma upon root n, the standardized variable z in that case could be written as z is equal to x bar minus mu upon sigma by root n, and this could also be written as x bar minus mu upon sigma x bar, and this is distributed normally with mean 0 and variance 1. I am sure you all know standardized variables always have mean 0 and variance equal to 1. Now, if the sampling distribution is approximately normal, then the standardized variable will have an approximately standard normal distribution. This is our simple economic, I would say, statistical theory. So if sigma is unknown and estimated by sample standard deviation s, but sample is large, let's say n is greater than or equal to 40, then the standardized variable z, which is x bar minus mu upon s upon under root n, would be equal to x bar minus mu upon s x bar square, and this has an approximately standard normal distribution. So what we have done is, we have replaced sigma by s because sigma is not known, and we have estimated sigma by s. If population is normal, then and sigma unknown and n less than 40, then what happens? Then the standardized variables, they becomes more variable, because the denominator of the standardized variable, which is sigma x bar, is no longer a constant. And since now sx bar is equal to s upon root n is a variable, because it changes with change in sample size, the standardized variable no longer has a standard normal distribution. Instead, the standardized variable, which can be written as t equal to x bar minus mu upon Sx bar has a t distribution with nu equal to n minus 1 degrees of freedom. Here nu we are saying, which is similar to V, is a symbol for degrees of freedom, and which we are saying is equal to n minus 1 in the current situation. And n is the size of the sample and is denoted by a small n. The t distribution is more spread out than the z distribution, but both are centered at 0. However, as sample size increases, for large n, the t distribution can be approximated by the z distribution or standard normal distribution. The knowledge of the sampling distribution of x bar assists us in making inferences about mu. We can extend this to inferences about linear functions of means of more than one population. Now, let us now move on to the discussion of confidence intervals, that how confidence intervals are defined and how they can be constructed. The confidence intervals can be two-sided or one-sided. We will first discuss the two-sided confidence interval. Then we will move on to the one-sided confidence interval. A confidence interval, as its name suggests, is composed of two parts. The interval is the range of values within which the true parameter is expected to lie with a specified probability. This probability is called the confidence level. It tells us what is the probability that the true parameter value will fall in the specified confidence interval. For example, if the parameter of interest is mu, which is our population mean, we first take its point estimator x bar and then create an interval centered at x bar. The width of the interval is the second aspect of the confidence interval and will itself depend on the required confidence level. So what we are saying is confidence interval is based upon confidence level. So let us understand the confidence intervals for population mean. Let the population be normally distributed such that we may say that x is distributed normally with mean mu and standard deviation sigma, and x bar is distributed also normally with mean mu but standard deviation sigma by under root n, which we have already proved. Now, under the assumption that sigma is known, if we will take the first case where we are saying sigma is known. So if we assume that sigma is known, then how the confidence interval is made? Let us see that. The standardized variable has the standard normal distribution, so that z is distributed normally with mean mu 0 and standard deviation equal to 1 or variance also equal to 1. Now in this case, z lies between minus infinity to plus infinity and centered at 0. For z equal to minus z alpha, which is same as 100 into alpha, percent of the area under the z curve lies to the left of minus z alpha, and 100 into 1 minus alpha, percent of the area is to the right of minus z alpha. Similarly, 100 into 1 minus alpha, percent of the area under the curve is to the left of z alpha, and 100 into alpha, percent is to the right. If z alpha by 2 is equal to plus minus 1.96, then 100 into alpha by 2 is equal to 2.5% area under the curve above the measurement axis will be at each tail of the distribution, as shown in figure 1. The area under the z curve between plus minus 1.96 is then 0.95 or 95%. In other words, we can write down that probability that z lies between minus 1.96 and plus 1.96 is equal to 0.95. This one can see from this figure. Now you can see that if z is equal to x bar minus mu upon sigma x bar, so that from the Z distribution we obtain probability that x bar minus mu upon sigma x bar is between 1.96, or which means it is less than 1.96 but greater than minus 1.96. This probability is equal to 0.95. Now rearranging the terms, we get probability x bar minus 1.96 into sigma upon root n is less than mu, which is less than x bar plus 1.96 into sigma by root n, and this probability is again same equal to 0.95. In other words, the probability that the true value of mu lies in the interval between x bar minus 1.96 into sigma upon root n and x bar plus 1.96 into sigma upon root n is 95%. So the interval is built around x bar and sigma by root n, and 1.96, as we have said, is nothing but the value of z alpha by 2. So the probability associated with this interval is 0.95, and this is the confidence level. The interval which we have defined just now, which is around mu, is nothing but the 95% confidence interval. X bar minus 1.96 into sigma upon root n and x bar plus 1.96 into sigma by root n are known as the lower and upper confidence limits of the interval respectively. The confidence limits are obtained by substituting the inequality, which is the sign of less than, by equality sigma in the confidence interval. The width of the interval is nothing but the difference between the two limits, which is equating 2 into 1.96 into sigma x bar. So in general, the 100 into 1 minus alpha percent confidence interval for this mu is the same as we mentioned again, which is that mu lies, or mu is greater than x bar minus z alpha by 2 into sigma by root n and is less than x bar plus z alpha by 2 into sigma by root n, where plus minus z alpha by 2 are called the critical values of z. Now some commonly used confidence levels, which means 1 minus alpha, are 95%, 99% and 90%. The corresponding z critical values could be for a normal distribution and defined as equal to plus minus 1.96, plus minus 2.58 and plus minus 1.645. The confidence interval for population mean is illustrated in our figure 2, and this is for x bar equal to small x bar. The 100 into 1 minus alpha percentage confidence interval is now from x bar minus z alpha by 2 into sigma by root n to x bar plus z alpha by 2 into sigma by root n. So this diagram is very clear, which gives us the intervals or the confidence interval around x bar, and this we find is centered at mu. The central value is mu. Let us learn the interpretation of this confidence interval. What is this confidence interval? How do we interpret it? All of this you must understand and learn. The confidence interval of population mean, in this case mu, is centered at the sample mean x bar with half the interval of length, which is let's say z or modulus z alpha by 2 into sigma x bar on either side of x bar. Now x bar is a random variable because it can take different values with associated probabilities. The width of the interval is fixed, which is twice into the modulus value of z alpha by 2 into sigma x bar. Now since z alpha by 2 modulus and sigma x bar are fixed for known alpha and n, However, the interval itself is random as it is centered at the random variable. So let me repeat, alpha is constant, n is constant, the z value also is constant, but the interval is random because it is centered or it depends on the value of x bar. Now this is illustrated with the help of some of the possible intervals in our figure 3. The intervals ai and bi of equal width are centered at x by xi bar for ith sample. So what we are showing is that if you change the sample, your xi bar will change and therefore your intervals will change. And we can show that the centered value, which is the mu value, is same in all these situations. But we have different samples or different intervals or different intervals with the same width, but these intervals are different depending upon the value of xi bar. So we have these fixed width confidence intervals for mu from some of the possible samples. We will find that some of the intervals are situated in such a way that the unknown mu falls within the interval, while in other cases mu may lie outside the interval or mu lies outside the interval. For example, in this diagram you can see interval of a5 to b5 is such where it is outside. So when we say that mu lies in the interval, it means that it lies in the interval of x bar minus z alpha by 2 into sigma by root n and of x bar plus z alpha by 2 into sigma by root n with a probability of 1 minus alpha. It means that with repeated sampling, 100 into 1 minus alpha percentage of the intervals so generated will contain the true value of mu, and 100 into alpha percentage will not contain this value. What is the rationale? The rationale for this interpretation follows from the relative frequency approach to assignment of probabilities. So if our alpha is 5%, then we are saying in repeated sampling, the 95% of the samples will be such that the mu value will lie within the interval, and in only 5% of the samples, this value will not be within the interval. Therefore, it is incorrect to state that the probability that we have mu in this interval and is equal to 1 minus alpha, where x bar is not a random variable. The correct statement is that probability of mu lying between x bar minus z alpha by 2 into sigma x bar and x bar plus z alpha by 2 into sigma x bar is equal to 1 minus alpha, where x bar is a random variable. So we are saying x bar is a random variable, therefore this is the probability which is equal to 1 minus alpha. If x bar is not random, we cannot define this confidence interval in the same manner and interpret in the same manner. So suppose we are required to find the 95% confidence interval for unknown mu. How do we do it? So let x bar be the calculated value of the mean of a random sample of n observations taken from the normal population with known variance sigma square. We can then state the 95% confidence interval of mu, and it would be equal to x bar minus 1.96 sigma upon root n and x bar plus 1.96 into sigma by root n. Note that this statement is not a probability statement. It is a statement where we have given the fixed values of the upper and the lower limit. Let's explain this with the help of an example. So let's take example 1. Suppose if a random sample of size n from a normal population with variance 225 has mean 64.3, and we want to construct a 95% confidence interval for the population mean. How do we do it? Let's see the solution. Now, since the population is normal with known sigma square, which we have mentioned is 225, the 95% confidence interval for mu could be written as 64.3 plus minus 1.96 into under root of 225 divided by 25, and this comes out to be 64.3 plus minus 1.96 into 3, and this is on simplification is equal to 64.3 plus minus 5.88, which gives us the interval of 58.42 as the lower limit and 70.18 as the upper limit. So let's take another example, example 2. A random sample of 100 ball bearings selected from a shipment of 1000 ball bearings has an average diameter of 0.354 centimeter with a standard deviation of 0.048 centimeter. The question is, find the 95% confidence interval for the average diameter of the 1000 ball bearings. What is the solution? Let's look at the solution. Now, since the population is finite and the sample size is large relative to population size, we will have to in this case use the finite population correction factor in calculating Sx bar. Although the population is unknown, since the sample is large, where we have said small n is equal to 100, the distribution of x bar is approximately normal. Now we can define Sx bar is equal to S upon under root n into under root of capital N minus small n divided by capital N minus 1, where capital N, let me remind you, is the population size and small n, I am sure you by now are familiar, is the sample size. Substituting the values, what we obtain is equal to 0.048 divided by 10 into under root of 900 divided by 999. Now, on simplification, we get the value which is equal to 0.00456. Let us now build this 95% confidence interval. The 95% confidence interval for the average diameter, which is of 0.354 plus minus 1.96 into 0.00456 is the one which we would obtain. Now, on simplification, what we get is 0.354 plus minus 0.0089, and this gives us the lower limit of 0.345 and 0.363. So you can calculate and verify these numbers here. Let us now understand what is the reliability and precision of these and what is the relationship with the sample size. The width of the interval is an indicator of the precision of the interval estimate. The narrower the interval, closer will the estimate likely to be to the true parameter value, which means wider is the interval, the less will be the reliability. The confidence level is an indicator of the reliability of the estimate. Ideally, we would want our interval estimate to be both more reliable and more precise. However, this is not possible. There is a trade-off between reliability and preciseness. For given alpha and or for given sigma and n, sigma x bar is fixed. Let us now compare the 95% and 99% confidence intervals. The 95% confidence interval is equal to x bar minus 1.96 into sigma by root n and x bar plus 1.96 into sigma by root n with a width of 2 into 1.96 sigma x bar. Now the 99% confidence interval is x bar minus 2.58 into sigma by root n and x bar plus 2.58 into sigma by root n. I am sure you would recollect 2.58 is nothing but z alpha by 2, where alpha now is 99%. Now this confidence interval has a width of 2 into 2.58 sigma x bar. Now obviously you can see from this comparison that the width of the 99% confidence interval is more than that of the 95% confidence interval. But the level of confidence is more for the 99% confidence interval than for the 95% confidence interval. Therefore, as the level of confidence or reliability increases, the width of the interval also increases and reduces the precision of the estimate. The reliability and precision of the interval estimates are therefore inversely related when the sample size n is given and sigma is known. If we wish to have a desired level of precision for a given confidence level, we can obtain that objective by adjusting the sample size. So when we want to maintain a particular level of precision, we are essentially placing an upper limit on the error of estimation. The maximum error in estimation is the distance from the sample mean to either upper or lower confidence limit. The maximum error of estimation is half the width of the interval, that is z alpha by 2 into sigma x bar. When we specify the maximum error, we are also specifying the desired width which is twice the maximum error. So actual error in estimation is the difference between the calculated value of sample mean and true population mean, which is nothing but x bar minus mu. Now this can be illustrated with the help of our figure 4. You can see in this figure that we have the value of x bar, we have the value of mu. Now the gap between them is defined as error. And we have the upper limit and we have the lower limit. And these upper limits and lower limits are based on z alpha by 2 into sigma upon root n on both the sides. So error of estimation x bar minus mu is demonstrated here with maximum possible error of z alpha by 2 into sigma x bar. So when we specify the width w, then we have w is equal to twice of z alpha by 2 minus sigma by root n. The required sample size is then given by n greater than or equal to twice into z alpha by 2 into sigma upon w raised to the power of 2, where we round off the fractional value of n to the next higher integer. For example, if calculated value is 31.19, then the required sample size is n equal to 32. Let us take an example. Example 3. A team of efficiency experts, they intend to use the mean of a random sample of size 150 to estimate the average productivity of workers in a large industry. Now, if it is known that sigma is equal to 6.2, what can they assert with a probability of 0.99 about the maximum error of their estimate? So let us see the solution, how they can do this. The solution is that sample is large and sigma is known, so the sampling distributions of means is approximately normal. Now maximum error of estimate is half the width of the interval. So for 99% confidence interval, the maximum error is 2.58 into 6.2 upon under root of 150. On simplification, we get this to be equal to 1.306. So this is in a way, we can say this is what the maximum error could be with a probability of 0.99. Let's take another example. A book publisher is interested, suppose, in estimating the strength of the book bindings produced by a particular binding machine. Now, strength can be measured by recording the force, let's say measured in pounds, which is denoted as LBS, and is required to pull the pages from the binding. Now, how many books should be tested to estimate the average force required to break the binding within 0.1 pond with 95% confidence? Now, assume that sigma is known to be 0.8 pond and that strength of the book bindings is normally distributed. What is the solution to this? Desired maximum error of estimation is 0.1 pond. Therefore, the maximum permissible width, which is W, is equal to 0.2, which is, I am sure you would recollect, is twice the error of estimation. So for 95% level of confidence, this will be equal to n greater than or equal to twice into 1.96 into 0.8 divided by 0.2 whole square. Now this comes out to be equal to 245.86. Therefore, we can say that the required sample size is 246. Let us now try to understand the confidence interval for mean when variance is unknown. Dear students, you know, so far we have assumed that sigma, which is the population variance, is known to us. Now we are trying to understand a situation where this population variance is not known to us and we have to estimate it. So suppose if we have a sample which is large, n is greater than or equal to 40, the confidence interval for population mean is derived as described earlier. Then we can use the Z distribution with the help of central limit theorem. The 100 into 1 minus alpha percent confidence interval in that case is x bar minus z alpha by 2 into s upon root n and x bar plus z alpha by 2 into s upon root n, where population sigma or population variance or sigma square is estimated from the sample data and we know is small s square. Similarly, population standard deviation sigma is estimated by the sample standard deviation s. However, if the sample is small, then we have to use the t distribution. Now, this requires the assumption that the population is normally distributed. The t distribution is symmetric about 0, just like z distribution. We actually have a family of t curves, each characterized by its degree of freedom nu. For each different degree of freedom, there is a different curve. A typical t curve is shown in our figure 5, in which you can see it is centered around 0 and we have t alpha by 2 and nu and minus t alpha by 2 nu, and the area between these upper and lower limit is 1 minus alpha. So this is our figure for a t distribution with nu degrees of freedom. The commonly available statistical table for the t distribution usually gives the t values for selected alpha levels, with each row of the table specific to a particular t nu curve. The subscript nu in t nu signifies the degrees of freedom of that curve. The 100 into 1 minus alpha percent confidence interval is now written as x bar minus t alpha by 2 nu into s upon root n and x bar plus t alpha by 2 nu into s upon root n, where nu is equal to n minus 1. Let me repeat and emphasize that this t value depends upon both alpha as well as this nu, which is degree of freedom. The method of arriving at a desirable sample size for a given level of confidence and precision is, however, only possible if the width can be fixed in advance. In section 4.3 earlier, we used the relation that W, which is the width, is equal to twice into z alpha by 2 into sigma upon root n. So once W is fixed and sigma is known and Z alpha by 2 is known given the confidence level, only unknown in the equation in that case is n. Hence we are able to arrive at the sample size n. However, if sigma is also unknown and needs to be estimated, the width will vary depending on the sample variance calculated from the selected sample. The problem is not so much in the variability of the sample variance, which is a constant for a particular sample, but that the value of the estimated sigma, which is equal to S, is known only after the sample is selected, whereas n, the sample size, has to be decided before drawing the sample. So let me emphasize, we are saying the size of the sample is to be decided before the sample, whereas the population or the sample variance or the population variance could be known only after the sample is selected. Now, in case the t critical values have to be used, then the problem is further complicated, as the t values themselves are dependent on the sample size. We cannot fix the t alpha by 2 without knowing the sample size, as degrees of freedom is itself derived from sample size. Hence, we cannot find the desired n. Let us take an example to understand this. This is our example 5. It is suspected that groundwater in a certain district has a high concentration of toxic element arsenic. A random sample of 5 water specimens selected from different areas of the affected district had a mean arsenic concentration of 24.3 UZ per liter, and the sample standard deviation was 4.1. Now, assuming that arsenic concentration in groundwater is normally distributed, let's calculate and interpret a 95% confidence interval for true average arsenic concentration in all such water specimens. Let's find how will we do it, what is the solution to it. Now, since a small sample is taken from a normal distribution with unknown sigma, the 95% confidence interval for mu, which is our population mean, is given to be 24.3 plus minus t alpha by 2, or t in this case could be 0.025 with a degree of freedom of 4 into 4.1 upon root 5. This comes out to be equal to 24.3 plus minus 2.776 into 1.8336. Again, on simplification, this is 24.3 plus minus 5.09, and we get the lower limit of 19.21 and the upper limit of 29.39. What is the interpretation of this? How do we explain this? So if a very large number of random samples, each containing 5 water specimens, were to be collected from the entire district, then 95% of the samples will generate intervals that will contain the true mean, whereas 5% of the samples will not. Now, one of the possible intervals is 19.21 to 29.39. Let us now move away from the two-sided or upper and lower intervals or two-sided confidence intervals and learn something about one-sided confidence intervals in this section 4.5. Now, what may happen is that in some instances we are not interested in finding the minimum or the maximum value of the parameter of the interest with a given level of confidence. For this, we derive the one-sided confidence intervals. So, which means we may be interested either in the upper tail or in the lower tail, or either in the upper value or the lower value. Now, in such cases, you will find that we simply fix the lower limit for the lower bound in confidence interval, leaving the upper limit open-ended. Similarly, the upper bound Ci could be, or confidence interval could be found by fixing the upper limit of the confidence interval at the desired level of confidence, leaving the lower limit open-ended. In all such cases, the probability of the interval of not including the true parameter value lies in one tail of the distribution of the statistic, whether Z or T. The conditions when the Z distribution is applicable and when the T distribution is suitable are identical to those for the two-sided confidence intervals as explained earlier. So there is no difference. The only difference could be that either we are interested in one tail, upper or lower, instead of both the tails. So let us assume the population is normal or sample is sufficiently large, so the distribution of this standardized variable has again a standard normal distribution or approximately a Z distribution. Now we know from the standard normal distribution that probability that Z is less than or equal to minus Z alpha is equal to alpha. Now this is equal to probability of Z greater than Z alpha, and this could also be written to be equal to 1 minus alpha. And we can also say that probability of Z greater than or equal to Z alpha is equal to alpha, which implies that probability of Z less than Z alpha is equal to 1 minus alpha. Therefore, looking at this, we may say that probability of x bar minus Z alpha into sigma upon root n being less than mu is equal to 1 minus alpha. Now this gives us the lower bound of 100 into 1 minus alpha % confidence interval for mu as x bar minus Z alpha into sigma upon root n and infinity. So which means infinity is the upper bound and the lower bound is given by x bar minus Z alpha into sigma upon root n. So we have the lower tail and the upper segment is open-ended. Similarly, since probability of mu less than x bar plus Z alpha into x upon root n is equal to 1 minus alpha, the upper bound 100 into 1 minus alpha % confidence interval is given by minus infinity and x bar plus Z alpha into sigma upon root n. So wherever the population variance is not known but sample is large with n greater than or equal to 40 and is estimated by sample variance S square, we substitute S in place of sigma to obtain the lower bound and upper bound confidence intervals, and we can replace sigma by S in both the upper limits and the lower limits respectively. The two types of one-sided confidence intervals are illustrated in our figure 6, where we have figure 6a for the lower bound and we have the figure 6b for the upper bound and upper tail respectively. Now, depending on the nature of the population, we may actually be able to have close-ended intervals also. For example, if the random variable x is non-negative, then the random variable x bar greater than or equal to 0 always would be true, and the upper bound confidence interval becomes equal to 0 and x bar plus Z alpha into sigma upon root n. In all other cases, we have confidence intervals that are open-ended, as we have only a finite lower limit or a finite upper limit, but not both. For all such open-ended intervals, we cannot calculate the width of the interval to measure the precision of the interval estimate. As a result, students, we cannot calculate the appropriate sample size for a desired level of confidence or reliability of the interval. Now, when the population is normally distributed but variance unknown and sample is small, then we have to use the T critical values for n-1 degrees of freedom. In that case, the 100 into 1 minus alpha % lower bound confidence interval for mu is x bar minus T alpha n-1 into s upon root n and infinity, where alpha is the area in the lower tail of the Tn minus 1 distribution, and probability of x bar minus T alpha n minus 1 into s upon under root n being less than mu is equal to 1 minus alpha. Similarly, the 100 into 1 minus alpha percent upper bound confidence interval for mu could be defined as infinity or minus infinity to x bar plus T alpha n minus 1 into s upon root n, where alpha area is in the upper tail of the Tn minus 1 into alpha distribution, and probability mu less than x bar plus T alpha n minus 1 into s upon root n is equal to 1 minus alpha. Let's take example 6. A random sample of 100 tablets of buffered aspirin contains on average 325.05 mg of aspirin per tablet with a standard deviation of 0.5 mg. Find the 95% upper bound confidence interval of the population mean. The solution is that the 95% upper bound confidence interval for mu is equal to x bar greater than or equal to 0, comma, or which means and this is 325.05 plus 1.645 into 0.5 upon root 100. Now, on simplification, this comes out to be equal to 0 and 325.13. In this case, we have assumed that x bar is greater than or equal to 0. So, we have the confidence interval from 0 to 325.13. Let's take another example, example 7. A random sample of 10 chocolate energy bars of a certain brand has on an average 230 calories per bar with a standard deviation of 15 calories. The question is, construct a 95% lower bound confidence interval for the true mean calorie content of this brand of energy bar. Assume that the distribution of the calorie content is approximately normal. What is the solution in this case? Since the sample is small and is drawn from a normal distribution with unknown sigma, we use the critical values of T alpha with the degrees of freedom n minus 1. And this is equal to minus 2.821 for the lower bound. The 99% lower bound confidence interval in that case would be equal to 230 minus 2.821 into 15 upon root 10, which gives us the value of 216.62. So our confidence interval now is from 216.62 to plus infinity, which is the upper bound in a way. Let us now summarize what we have learned in this long session. The interval estimate is centered at the point estimate of the parameter value. We have also learned that the confidence level is the probability the true value of the parameter lies within the confidence interval, where the sample statistic is a random variable. We can have two-sided confidence intervals and one-sided confidence intervals. We have also learned that once the single sample has been selected and used to arrive at the interval, it is no longer a probability statement, as the calculated sample statistic is a constant for that sample. The confidence level is a measure of the reliability of the estimate, and the width of the interval is a measure of the precision of the estimate. We have seen that if higher is the confidence level, greater is the reliability. Smaller is the width, greater is the precision. So there is a kind of a trade-off between reliability and precision. We have also understood that as the confidence level is increased, the width of the interval also increases. Thus, reliability and precision are inversely related for given sample size. So both reliability and precision can be increased simultaneously only by increasing the sample size. However, this is only possible in case of two-sided confidence intervals and if critical values of the standard normal distribution are being used. Thank you very much.